in Jamaica doing research. We spent some time together to map out what we want to do. So the Pan African Council basically is an organization that's led by young people from the African continents and the African diaspora. The idea is to connect the African diaspora to the continent, right? So in there we have ambassadors, government ambassadors, we have
Hello, viewers. Welcome to another episode of the Yaa Yeboaa podcast. Studio with my brother from another mother, Chevy Eugene. And foremost, also to say thank you for saying yes. Thank you for agreeing to have this dialogue with me. That it's not only institutional or academic, but it's also part of our living narrative. So, Chevy, thank you, and thank you for coming onto the Yaa Yeboaa podcast.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the space to share my thoughts. As I'm the Caribbean ambassador, I'm the Pan African Council Caribbean ambassador.
Pan African Council Caribbean
ambassador. Also, you could say the ambassador to the Caribbean as well. Okay. Just to clarify. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I first of all want to start with your background. I think I can hear the Caribbean drip. You're not running away from it.
Really? I thought I sounded like I was from Kumasi.
Hey. Okay, we'll go to the Ghana part. But before then, let's get to the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so originally I'm from the island, the beautiful island. The island that's recently won the 100-meter gold medal at the Olympics, the island of Juliet Alfred, St. Lucia. So I was born in St. Lucia, spent the first 17 years of my life there, and moved to Toronto in 2002.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You're also Torontonian, and then you ended up way up there. Nice. I'm surprised we never crossed paths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. So when you came to Toronto, that when you went to York University, or?
So I came in Toronto in 2002, and then went to York in 2009. So my family basically live in Canada. So we travel between Canada and St. Lucia. Mm-hmm. So what I always tell people is like a rites of passage. Yes. Right up in my family. So right after you finish high school, they ship you right to Canada. Because my mother was there. So my older sister was the first one in 96 when we visited. She had finished at the time. And then my second older sister was in 2000. And then I was the last one in 2002. All right. So and that's when.
How was the culture shock for you?
I don't know, because I visited before in 96. I mean, it was just about seeing the culture shock for me. I would say was seeing non-Black or non-Caribbean people listen to dancehall and hip hop, right? And I'll say non-Black people. I won't say non-Black Caribbean people. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I remember walking on the street in Margarita Street. I still remember that street, and some young white man was driving, blasting hip hop, and then I would hear reggae, right? And to me, I was always so shocked at that. Not in the sense of why I listen to the music, but I always had an understanding to some degree of racism, right? I'm not saying that all white folks were racist, but it always intrigued me to see how our culture has been shared with and taken up. Not saying they were exploiting the culture or anything, but that was like my shock. So I think that was like the actual transition, and also learning different things in regards to certain things like saying good morning. Like in the Caribbean, yes. And I'm sure you could make the same argument in Ghana, that one will get up and will say good morning to the neighbors or people passing them on the street. And sometimes I'll say good morning, good evening, good night, etc. And people just ignore you. So these were the pieces. And obviously you have like in regards to infrastructure, etc. Yeah. But in regards to the people aspect, these were the two main things I could recall for now.
Okay. Nice. For me, well, it was an identity crisis when I discovered I was a Black person, and I never knew I was Black. And then it's, what does it mean to be Black? It's like rediscovering all these things in this space, whereby in the reverse, when you see a person who is non-Black in Ghana, you really don't think about it because of the way the culture is so often open and welcoming. You don't think about that. But then on the flip side, you encounter these challenges to who you are as a person. And it makes you ask, it sometimes fundamentally shakes your core. But like I was explaining to you earlier, it's my Caribbean brothers and sisters, Black Canadians who've been here, who've had the journey and the experience that explained to me what was going on.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would say similarly. Well, for me, it was different because growing up in the Caribbean, especially in St. Lucia was a tourist industry. At the time, it transitioned from banana industry to heavily tourism as the main industry. So it's always open, like you said, very welcoming. But then I grew up with Rastafarians. I grew up in the church, in the Pentecostal church, but I always used to hang out and have reasoning sessions with Rastafarians in my community, particularly the second part of my childhood, I would say, because I grew up in the ghetto, but I engaged with the Rastafarians in the countryside when I lived with my father after my mother migrated to Canada. And they would teach us, the young men in particular, about Africa, about Marcus Garvey, the arguments that we were kings and queens before coming to the Caribbean. So I always had in my case, I won't say always, I was introduced to Blackness and Africanness by the Rastafarians. And to echo your point, and maybe that's where the culture, going back to your first question and my response, maybe that's where the culture shock happened. Because I know in the Caribbean, as you mentioned, same in Ghana, we were very open, and then you come into a space, right? And then because you hear about racism, etc., right? And then you see your culture being celebrated celebrated or utilized or commercialized, right, by non-Black people, right? So for me, my Blackness, was introduced in the Caribbean, and just like what you said, we were welcoming. We knew we were Black. We were reminded, especially coming from living in the African diaspora in the Caribbean, just the history of the Caribbean itself. You always get that one-time reminder, but it never limited you into what you can be, right? Yes, there were various barriers or barriers when you think about class, etc., gender, but more class, right? Those type of barriers. But education played a crucial role, and it still does in the Caribbean when you think about social mobility. So the idea of Blackness, you knew you were Black, but in regards to the consequences of being Black when you leave that space, that Caribbean space, was a different type of reality.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So you're now a professor, full-blown professor at Dalhousie, and what exactly do you teach?
So I am in the Department of Political Science and Black and African Diaspora Studies. So I could say assistant professor in political science that's focused on Black studies. So I teach right now 3 courses for the year. Intro to Black and African Diaspora Studies, Black Radical Thought, and the Politics of Reparations. So these are the 3 classes I teach for this year. Yeah.
They're heavy.
Very exciting. Yeah.
I would love to sit in one of your classes. They are really heavy and thought provoking, and I guess sometimes it can be emotional as well, and excitable. I think, excitable, and the excitable that I am talking about, our kind of excitement. Okay, so with your experience as a professor and also doing and your work as an ambassador. Now, before I get to that question, let's get to your work as an ambassador. In the first place, what was the drive to you joining the Pan-African Council?
Well, I've been doing work around the Caribbean for years now. So you mentioned about Toronto. So Toronto introduced me to so many things. Toronto introduced me to the Caribbean, but more importantly, Africa and the world, in the sense that in St. Lucia, you are St. Lucian, right? A St. Lucian living in the Caribbean. And when I migrated to Canada, I became this Black person, as a person of African descent. But the desire and the love for Blackness was always inside of me. And I think that was inspired by my love for justice, or especially when, growing up in the church, let's just say growing up in the church, reading, having Sunday school, youth services, etc., and just the role that the Bible played in my life. And part of that was around justice. Part of that was about, if you're in a position to help individuals, you should do what you can. So just those little things, in addition to conversations, like I mentioned, with Rastafarians, that empowerment, right? And wanting experiencing a type of liberation in the Caribbean as a young person. I'm not saying the Caribbean and St. Lucia in particular does not have issues, but seeing the possibilities of what one can be and do as a Black person through education or various other means, and not being limited to that. So coming to Canada, my experience is that I had to do 1 year in high school. I was angry, but I was very happy I did it at the end of the day, because I got to see the differences of how Black students were treated. Rather than just reading, I actually got to leave it.
Yes.
Right? So I saw the differences. I saw how they'll silence Black students. And I came from a space where I talk a lot, in a sense of how, it was exciting to go to school. You didn't want to miss school growing up in the Caribbean, right? So having those type of experiences in high school, and seeing when I was in grade 12, I'm the only grade 12 Black student in certain classes. You have grade 12 students, but Black students, but they're in grade 9, doing grade 9, grade 10 maths. And then you understand later on in life, I understand there was a systemic, how the system played a role in preventing or limiting the possibilities of Black students. Even sometimes I'll speak on some things in the classroom and the teacher will try to silence me, but I'm like, I never lack confidence. Let's just say that, right? Because it's not just a Chevy thing, but also my family, and I should mention, and I didn't say that, my family, education in my family is very important. My aunts, my dad, my mother, my sisters, when it comes to education, everyone was focused around that. So there was no lack of self-esteem growing up in the Caribbean, in my environment, right? My social environment at home and in school and in the community as well. So that aspect. So then I used to do a lot of community work in Toronto. So you mentioned about poetry. I actually used to do spoken word as well, to talk about Black empowerment, Black love, how that goes.
How come we never cross paths?
I don't know, my time was around 2005-6 to 2009.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was
the latter year.
A few years earlier,
I
would
was
assume.
off the scene then.
Yeah, you see there you go. So you were earlier then. So I was later on mentored by people like Sankofa and a few other folks, right?
Hold on. You know.
Yeah, I know Sankofa very well. Just ask. I know Sankofa very, very well.
Well, I must say that this conversation is getting interesting. Yes, he's a pillar.
He was one of my mentors in the getting into the community, I would say. So all being around all that type of Blackness empowerment around South Africa, etc., in addition to my St. Lucian upbringing, and then connecting with people from the continent, right? So when I talk about it, introduced me to the Caribbean, in addition to that, the continent, people from Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, etc., right? South Africa, etc., and learning about culture, learning about each other. Right, so that inspired the idea of the consciousness, the Black liberation piece, right? And doing the readings, being part of community organization, being part of left-leaning organization, Marxist organizations, be introduced to Black Marxism thinkers like Walter Rodney, Cyril James, Claudia Jones, people like Claudia Jones, and being introduced to those thinkers, and also being introduced to people like Dudley Laws in Toronto, Charles Roach, going to a different Berkeley's where I spent a lot of my time. I even worked there briefly. My daughter worked there in the summer. That's to show you like how significant the place been to me, Ita, Miguel, and everyone around that space. So especially Miguel, to even the bookstore, when you talk about the Pan-African, I remember when I just got to the bookstore, when it used to be in the smaller location
Which
before
one are we talking
a
about?
different book list
A
in
different book
Toronto.
list.
Yeah,
Oh,
different book list in
the
Toronto.
Queen Mother. No, she's the first lady. I'm the Queen Mother. Yes.
So Aita, Miguel, for people who are
Yes.
listening, giving a little context, they're giving me books to read. Miguel in particular, I never forgot. He told me a very important book to read is C.R.R. James Black Jacobins. He put it in my hand. He gave me Marcus Garvey Message to the Grassroots. He gave me Rape of Paradise, and there was a fourth book he gave me. I could never remember the fourth one, but he gave me four books, tell me to start or to continue my journey. So that introduced me to the wider world, right? And going to university at York University, I went in 2009. I went in when I was 24 to 25. So York introduced me to a whole different piece. How do we look at those readings from an how do we look at those readings in a more structured way?
Yes.
And it introduced me to students who are from the Caribbean, Canada, and Africa as well, creating relationships with those students, right? And then doing so. In addition to my community work, university, family, the university introduced me to another world. I did an exchange to Barbados for 1 year, and that gave me some form of empowerment. And that time, my research was around Caribbean integration through the arts. I focused heavily on the idea of one Caribbean. In my arguments and learning my research, I would say on one Caribbean, the idea of Caribbean integration, it extends to Latin America, it extends to Africa, right? It extends to Europe when you think about the Caribbean diaspora in Britain in particular, right? So all the community, the physical community in Toronto, um, York University, family, it introduced me to everything. So all those I would say factors played a role in my consciousness around blackness, right? About black liberation. So through my community work, and there are so many other little projects, but I was introduced to the Pan African Council, right? I would say not just the Pan African Council, but the Global African Congress, like Sakaya Thomas and the role that they played pushing for reparations since the 90s, right? So the Pan African Council came at a time, and I'll say what the Pan African Council is. I had a meeting with the chair in 2019 when I was in Jamaica doing research. We spent some time together to map out what we want to do. So the Pan African Council basically is an organization um, that's led by young people from the African continents and the African diaspora. The idea is to connect the African diaspora to the continent, right? So in there we have ambassadors, government ambassadors, we have entrepreneurs, activists, academics, people from different working in various skills, right, from different sectors, etc. Right, and the idea is to, like I said, to connect either through investment, either through trade. And one of our main office is in Rwanda. We have an office in South Africa, in Ghana. We opened an office in Brazil in 2019. I remember going to that launch in 2019. In Colombia, we recently hosted my colleagues in Brazil. They opened up space to host the Angolan government. The Angolan government brought them to Angola to talk about trade and investment between those two nations. So when we talk about Pan Africanism, we do stuff on the ground. We do stuff like my friends will say, higher higher dialogue. So right, so we kind of position ourselves in that middle space, right? We understand the significance of grassroots movement, but also the conversation that need to take place with governmental officials, right? So the focus is primarily in on the global South Pan African Council. So my role as the Caribbean ambassador is to open that space to connect people in the Caribbean, whether investors, whether it's artists, etc., to the African continent. and we're actually hosting an event in Kenya in the next 2 weeks,
Oh.
to better foster trade between the Caribbean and East Africa.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. That is, it's the ignorance is blissful, but it's a very expensive, um, it's very expensive not knowing what is going on in the world and how the world is changing around you, or how you can also be part of a movement that seeks to transform a group of people. And although we've been displaced for over 400 years all over, we still know that we can come together as a group, as a force, um, to build something, great. I was trying to find some statistics that the Pan African Council had on its website on the growth of African peoples of African descent, sorry, peoples of African descent by, is it 2030 on the continent and also in the diaspora. Our population is increasing, and
Hmm.
in increasing population is also increasing financial,
Hmm.
you know, power. So I do applaud the work that you guys are doing to stitch and bring us together to be able to sit and invest in each other so we can together be uplifted, not as a St. Lucian, not as a Ghanaian, not as a Jamaican, not as, a Colombian, but together as one, Black people from the continent. So thank you. Now, one of the interesting things and that I find is when I came across the HBCUs, is that historically black, yeah, HBCUs in the USA, and they are educating people. It made me go back to Ghana's independence and Nkrumah, that Pan Africanism that helped Ghana to become
Hmm.
the Ghana you and I can speak of right now. What is your take on that?
On what's happening right now,
Yes,
which are
with
HBCUs.
yes.
I think it's excellent. But even before I speak on that, did you know, fun fact, that Nkrumah's government, Nkrumah, I would say, was mentored by some of the Caribbean Pan Africanists?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll say that to the audience. One of them being Sir Arthur Lewis from St. Lucia, one of them being George Padmore from Trinidad and Tobago, another one being from CLR James. So Nkrumah had a very strong relationship with Caribbean Pan Africanists. They all connected in London. This is just for the audience. I like to say, this is the St. Lucian, the Caribbean in me, speaking out a little proud Caribbean person.
And I
And what I
love
was,
that. I
yeah.
love that. If I don't
Hmm.
make it a tidbit, it is a very important part of history we don't
Hmm.
often know or talk about. And that
Hmm.
is why we're having this conversation, to put it out there that Ghana
Most
is not
definitely.
just Ghana because of Nkrumah being there. There are people that mentored him, that said, "We got your back, go do the work." That is why that man was as passionate as he is, making sure that Ghana got out of colonialism to be able to uplift other members of the African continent. So I want, in fact, repeat what you just said.
Okay, thanks. What you said, you want me to? Sorry.
No, I said repeat what you just said. George
Yeah,
Padmore.
George Padmore, CLR James, Sir Arthur Lewis, and he had strong relationships with Eric Williams, the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who led Trinidad into independence in 1962. So there's a strong. I'm saying this to say not just to boost up, the Caribbean piece, but to connect, to show the role of history. Before I answer that question, about the HBCUs, Ghana, the African continent, had that strong connection with the African diaspora, especially the Caribbean people. When you think of when Mussolini was trying to invade Ethiopia, You had people like CLR James, Amy Ashwood Garvey, Marcus Garvey's first wife, who created a organization to liberate Ethiopia. Rastafarians in Jamaica, was also part of that as well, to fight on behalf of Ethiopia to overcome Mussolini. So historically, we've always had the tie, those connections, and a few years after, just a few years, but in between, they had struggles where we didn't celebrate, or we wouldn't see those type of connections due to colonialism and neocolonialism. But now, I'm going back to your question. Now, when you think about the HBCUs, now you're seeing that resurgence, right? You're seeing continental Africans. When you hear them speak, especially some of those of my cohorts. I remember some of them used to say, growing up, I wanted to be Jamaican. Even when I had interviews in London, however, that's switching now. They embracing the Africanness. I'm from Ghana. I'm from Nigeria. It's a Niger man and a Niger woman, right? And there's this sense of this this power, right? And I love it when we see Afrobeat, as much as Butcher Banton came out and said what he said about Afrobeat, but the role of culture and young people. So that has echoed, right, internationally, and the piece of the HBCUs is just one of the many examples. I'll say the outcomes, right, and not just the HBCUs. I have a few universities, that offered me a few positions. One of the mandates in my interviews with them was to connect with the African continent, connect with universities there, right? So yes, the HBCUs, but then you also have universities, York, um, um, Dalhousie, where I'm based right now, UFT, making those connections or reestablishing or strengthening those connections, because Africa is the present and the future, right? When you see how what's happening right now in the world, etc., China, Russia, etc. I don't to go all there, but that's a reality. Everybody's fighting. When you
For
think about the building
peace.
conference that took place 100 years ago, everybody's trying to the re-scrambling. But then you see there's a resurgence of African leaders fighting on for themselves on their behalf. When you see what had taken place in Burkina Faso, right, with the leaders chasing out Europeans, etc.
Yes.
Right, so the HBCU space is just a byproduct of that, or I'll say an example of that resurgence, that Africanness. That Africa is claiming its space, but then at the same time, you have to be careful, right? If leaders are there just for the sake of leadership, or puppets, etc. So I don't want to romanticize it. We also have to deal with the reality of it. So the HBCUs, I love that. I love that Americans, and not just Americans, Black Canadians as well. The desire to, when you talk about identity, get to know who they are, their ancestors, in a non-romanticized way. When Ghana had in 2019 the year of return, to see a lot of people in Toronto, who moved to Ghana. I remember I was in Ghana in November or last year or December for Africa Union hold a reparations conference with CARICOM, the Caribbean community. I was there, and I went to this after the conference a day or two. I went to this vegan festival, and I just ran into so many people from Toronto. I felt I was like downtown
Did you
Toronto
meet
for a
Brother
while.
OG?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. Most definitely. I went to Brother Ochi's elder and a mentor. I love this brother.
Yes.
When I was there, when each time I go to Ghana, I visit Brother Ochi. Always treats me. We have lunch. We talk. I played basketball with his sons. His son, I would say, and
Oh,
his yeah. So I'm very close to Brother Ochi. Yeah. So
I am so surprised, Chevy. Our paths never crossed, but a lot of the key people in the society
yeah, man.
are, well, what is the word? It's like always there's a 6 degrees of separation.
Most
Right now, the
definitely.
separation is no more.
Most definitely. Yeah, so the HBCUs, and I think is just one of the multiple things that's happening. So even with the conference that we're doing, or the convention that we're holding on the 27th of September, which is a Friday in Nairobi, um, it is part of it is to bridge that gap, right? When I give the example about Kenya, in Portugal, my friends in Brazil, connecting, or my colleagues, I would say, connecting and building a relationship with Angola. They have multiple examples of that, because historically, to connect with from Latin America, to my understanding, to connect with the African continent, you always have to go through Europe. So now people are creating, through technology, social media, and desire, people are creating their own ways to connect with each other. where it's not being filtered down. There's no misunderstanding. So we're connecting from Latin America, Caribbean directly to Africa, and the HBCUs, those and other universities are just, like I said, one of the multiple examples where we see that taking place.
Wow, this is wonderful. This is great. I love every piece of it and the incredible work that you're doing. I'm just going to throw this out. What was your experience like when you went to Ghana? And
In
this is
Ghana,
just a proud Ghanaian woman talking as
yeah,
it
it
were.
was. So I went to Ghana twice, and the first time I went as first time experience, grassroots brother, and it was amazing. I was not going there with any expectations, but was open to any and everything. And before that, I sure you probably know then of Nene. Um,
Yeah, Nene
Nene,
Kafele.
yeah. So
Yes.
Nene Kafele, yes, other Nene Kafele. So we met with Nene. Nene gave us a breakdown of the expectations, understanding culture, people, and we being my close colleague and brother Quinton Vassetti. Um, he's also an artist based in Toronto, Afrofuturist. So Quinton and I, we met with Nene and a few elders just to, the expectations, etc. And we connected up with some few people when we got there. Before we got there, I would say, and those individuals like Prince Tafari, who's based in he's based at the Arts Culture in oh my gosh, what's the capital of of Ghana? My mind is slipping.
Accra.
Um, Accra. He's based in Accra. Yes. In the Arts Culture Center. He has a great host. So he brought us to community. I never forget. He brought us to the nitty gritty. So we had different experiences. We went to the nitty gritty, like, community, you know,
Yes.
we opened the year in a community people told us not to go to, but the community was amazing. Like had a bonfire, some Rastafarians, Muslim youths were around the corner, Christian youths were around the corner, fireworks. So we opened the year in
Yeah.
a real conscious vibrations. He took us to Kumasi to meet his family. We did tours in Kumasi, the kingdoms, etc. Did a few interviews because we were working on a documentary at the time. We went to Cape Coast with
Mm-hmm.
Brother OG hosted us, gave us food, and then we went to Cape Coast. We met a few other Caribbean people, and we
Yes.
spent the night in Cape Coast, which was magical. And we went to Aburi in the hills, met with some the botanical gardens. We had a nice lunch in in the garden there with some people who are from Ghana, some people who are say returnees or people who have moved to Ghana from the African diaspora. And doing very well and just giving us a background and the work they've been doing, etc. So we had an amazing moment. So my first time was more from a grassroots point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I'm connecting with community and activists, intellectuals, etc. So that was an amazing moment. The second time, however, I came in as a quote unquote ambassador for Pan African Council. So the treatment was very, so it's more high end. So the first night I got there, we had dinner at the presidential palace. Right, that's when they were launching the conference,
Yes.
the reparations conference between the African Union and CARICOM. So I came as part of that CARICOM delegation, and represented Pan African Council. So a lot of high level meetings, a lot of exclusive, you know, exclusive meetings and places to visit. Yeah, and then we also went to Cape Coast as well. But at the same time, I also engaged with my people I connected with from
Yes.
my first trip. Right, did a lot of community work because everywhere I go, yes, the like I mentioned, as Pan African Council, we occupy that middle space, so we could do the high level and we do community as
And
well,
then
and we try to see how we could bridge that gap. Right, so it was two magical moments. Met new people. The second time I went, the first time I connected with some Rastafarians, and the second time they were all at the reparations conference, so we reconnected and we've been in contact since then to see how we could do some work together, etc., on the role of Rastafari in reparative justice. So overall, um, my experience, I should say, in both cases has been pretty good.
You talk about the role of Rastafari. It's unfortunate, so much embedded colonial mentality in Ghana, in people having locks on their heads.
Mhm.
For me, it is very sad because of the spirituality of it and the trueness of it. But we've lost that touch that in school you can't keep your hair because of X, Y, and Z. Everybody cuts their hair. I'm not sure whether it's coming back that you can keep your natural hair without cutting it, or you can do your locks and with and all those things. It's sad for me that we've lost ourselves to something which is not ours, and then we put on our, we perm our hair, put on our, anyways, let me stop going there. But on that note, I would like to say thank you because of how everything happened. I have my beautiful headscarf on representing Mama
Most
Africa.
definitely.
Everything
Most
happens
definitely.
for a good reason. Otherwise, I'll probably have a different kind of hair on. But I am glad it happened this way, and I have this on, and I can speak to the trueness of when you walk in totality of who you are. So, not to take too much of your time, we've been having an excellent conversation on Pan African Council, your role and your journeys into it. Now, let's come to the lessons, the lessons you've learned as a professor and the lessons you've learned as an ambassador, and what you have to share with the young folks coming up. Take it from there.
Um, so lessons as a professor, what I learned actually in the last
Keep
few years,
teaching
we all
English.
enter, yeah, yeah, we enter the learning I say spectrum or paradigm differently. When I say we, I'm talking about the students. So I grew up in the Caribbean. I'm sure you could make the same argument in Ghana and certain parts of the African continent around colonialism and education. The type of system we had was always a memorized and regurgitated system, right? So only a certain group of people might excel. And it doesn't mean that they are the smartest in the classroom, but the learning might be more adaptable to the model, the colonial model. I'm not saying whether it's wrong or right. I leave that for the viewers, right, based on the experiences. But teaching at UFT, because before I'm only at in Halifax at Dalhousie for just over a year now. I'm going into my second year. So I taught at University of Toronto the transitional
Oh,
year program for 5 years. Um,
oh my
and I did
goodness.
black, yeah,
Are you kidding me?
yeah. I recently taught the last 5 years. So yeah.
Chevy, it just
Hmm.
clicked to me. I went through the transitional year program. Na-
Okay, when was that?
I'm going to give myself out. 1999.
Oh, okay.
Horace Hendricks taught me sociology. Thomas was
Yeah.
there. Karen Breathwaite
Was
was the
the
one
Horace
that
Campbell?
inspired. Sorry?
Is it Horace Henry or Horace Campbell? Jamaican, right? Is it
Horace
Jamaican?
Hendricks Campbell at the end,
Oh, okay.
but he went with
Okay.
Horace Hendricks, yes. And
Okay.
for math, it was Professor Ahia.
I hear, yeah. I know former colleague Ahia, yeah, man. Ahia is still there.
If
So
you
I was,
if at any point in time you go, you look at the 1999 year group, you see a Bernadette there. I didn't use
okay.
this name then. This was my
Yeah,
spoken word stage name, but
yeah,
the colonized name is Bernadette Poku.
most definitely. Yeah,
Chevy, God
so
bless you.
likewise. Yes, and I came in recently, so the last 5 years. Yeah, so I taught at TYP, and what I learned at TYP, and maybe you, so if you want to talk about lesson learned, you probably will realize that too, even if your peers, that people enter the learning spectrum differently. Like not
Yes.
necessarily the memory regurgitate etc. type of way of learning. That I met students at TYP where I had to be very creative if the way I engage with them, right? Even some of them, like for example, I always speak about this one student. Almost all his references were Disney films. At first, I was taken aback, but then when I started to work with him, I see how his mind works. So I started to integrate different type of visual um, creative expressions to engage with him that connected more to the courses. So as a professor, TYP introduced me to that, and now I've kind of extended that in my, we'll say, the mainstream piece of education at DAL, and also when I used to teach at global, what's it called, critical development studies at UFT as well. So I incorporated those pedagogical approaches in addition to being mentored by people like Andrea Davis at York University.
Yes.
So all those things I something about lesson learned. I think that's the key. And being patient with students, the second one. And the third one, I would say understanding, like, and being patient with students, and also letting students be patient with the classmates. Because a lot of times students will silence themselves because they don't have the language to express the way what they're thinking, and sometimes it might come out sexist and they might come out racist, classes, etc. But it's not that they had, it's not a reflection of their heart, it's just that they don't have the language. So so creating a space for them to teach them that language, and for the classmates to support them in the intellectual and critical development. So this is one of the things I learned, and I actually be speaking about it at TYP's 50-year anniversary conference on October 4th. So if you're around field three. So I'll be speaking about some of those examples and my approach as groundings, my groundings approach. Um, yeah. So my what I've learned also as someone who do work as a Pan Africanist, the struggle, the source, I would say, or the roots of our problem, racial capitalism or white supremacist capital, patriarchy, is the same, but it manifests differently in different spaces. Sometimes we'll see there's some correlations, right? There's some connections, but when you think about how it manifests in the Caribbean, I guess say Saint Lucian and Trinidad and Tobago will have some commonalities, but also differences when you think about diversity of ethnic groups and race, right? So when you think about Latin America, Brazil compared to Colombia, so it's just understanding and studying, you know, the how racial capitalism, white supremacy manifests in those spaces. And when you think about it, people globally, whether you're black, white, etc., I think we are all trying. Well, I'm not romanticizing that. At the end of the day, people want better housing, healthcare, education, food, etc., for they love themselves and their loved ones, right? And then that's one of the ways I try to connect with Black folks globally, in addition to Black liberation, right? And thinking about systemic transformation. So for me, understanding those differences and understanding the commonalities as well, right? So that's the key thing for me. Yeah, those two things I would say. Well, not two things, but my lessons learned as a educator and as a Pan Africanist.
Chevy, you have just blown my mind. I didn't realize how deep, our how do we call it, background links went further. And when you mentioned TYP, I realized that I had been after you even when you were at TYP, but you probably did not receive the message and email from me as yet. But I had
Hmm.
you in mind. So it's all coming together. That's why you saw that expression. It's like, oh, that's him. Yes, 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 yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for your
Thank you.
patience. Thank you for your time.
Hmm.
Thank you for everything you do. And I'll say I'm very proud of you. And please don't stop. There's a lot of work to be done. And you and I need to do it, and also pull those that are coming after us to continue the path that we have started, to go higher than what we are doing, have deeper conversations, build social structures, be transformative leaders, and any last thoughts?
Give thanks. First and foremost, thank you for um, inviting me and giving me the space to share my thoughts. Like I said, yeah, it's beautiful. When you said Toronto and spoken word, I figured when I mentioned a few things we connect, because I always feel like going back to the rites of passage. There are people that are pillars in those communities, and they have mentored so many people. Sometimes we don't even know that, right? So thank you for the space. Thank you, give me share my thoughts, and I'm looking forward to meet you in person. And thank you for the positive words. I'm sending positive energy right back to you. Continue to do the work. Continue to create the space for us to share our stories. So I give thanks for that, and I give thanks for you and all the work that you do. Give thanks.
Amen.
Yeah.
Guys, you have been listening to us on the Yaa Yeboaa podcast, myself and Chevy Eugene. It's been a wonderful pleasure. We'll see you on the next episode.
Splice Original.